Addressing Gettysburg.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's good to see you all. My name is Christopher Gwynn. I'm the Chief of Interpretation and Education here at Gettysburg National Military Park, and welcome to our winter lecture series. As I say every week, we know you have a lot of options. Apparently there's some sort of athletic contest today. So I'm very grateful that you're here with us to hear what I have every confidence is going to be a fantastic talk. A couple of reminders. As always, if you do have a cell phone, we ask you to turn that on to silent. If you have missed a winter lecture or simply want to rewatch a lecture that you've seen, I encourage you to go to YouTube and follow Addressing Gettysburg. Matt Callery and his team are filming all of the lectures for us this year and making those available online. They've been fantastic. So again, I encourage you, if you've missed a lecture or want to rewatch one, head to Addressing Gettysburg. We are very blessed to have with us today as our winter lecture speaker, Dr. Peter S. Carmichael, who is the Robert C. Floyd Professor of Civil War Studies at Gettysburg College and the Director of the Civil War Institute. Dr. Carmichael received his PhD in history from Penn State University in 1996. His academic interests include 19th century U.S. history, Civil War and Reconstruction, Southern history, public history, cultural history. He's the author of numerous books and articles on the American Civil War and the Civil War era, including The Last Generation, Young Virginians in Peace, War, and Reunion, Lee's Young Artillerist, William Pegram, and most recently, The War for the Common Soldier, published by the North Carolina Press in November of 2018. This is available in our bookstore, and Dr. Carmichael has graciously agreed to do a book signing following the lecture, so if you have not picked up a copy, I would encourage you to do it. Now, in addition to his publications, he has appeared on numerous television documentaries and series, including PBS, their American Experience series. He was featured on Who Do You Think You Are with actress Liv Tyler, right?
Right here, yeah.
Now, if he was a good partner, he would have invited me to attend that. He failed to do so. I've moved on. In all seriousness, though, Dr. Carmichael is a wonderful friend and partner of the National Park Service. He has been incredibly gracious with his time, with his expertise. He is an unflagging supporter of good public history at sites like Gettysburg, and it is with great pleasure that I introduce him to our winter lecture series today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Peter.
Appreciate it. Chris is correct. I was not a very good friend partner when I did not invite him to join me to meet Liv Tyler. I've done these kinds of things before for various, history programs, and I was so nervous with Liv Tyler. I was like talking all over the place, and she was like completely confused by the end in my little bit with Liv. So I was not a good partner then, but I will say, as Chris pointed out, he and I and his staff here at Gettysburg National Park, we have done a lot, I think, of important things together, not just programs, but I see some of my students up here in the front row. Many of them have had opportunities here at this park to be practicing historians, thanks to Chris and his staff. I'm always somewhat dismayed when I go out, speak to the public, and they tell me how the young people don't care about history, they don't have a passion for it, they're not going to follow that in a professional way, all of which is not true at all. I can speak of Gettysburg College, where we have a very vibrant internship program that places anywhere between 20 to 35 students at national parks, stretching all the way from Little Bighorn to Manassas. And this year, for the first time, we're going to have 2 students at the Battlefield Trust. It's important that our students know and learn the preservation ethic. We have a public history minor, so that students, and Chris is a Gettysburg alum, no public history minor back in the day, but we have it now. And these students are learning the nuts and bolts of what it means to be a historian at a historic site. This semester, this is a big class for Gettysburg. I have 30 students. We pride ourselves at Gettysburg for having classes that are between 15 to 20. But the interest is so strong that that's the size of the class this semester, which is fantastic. The other thing I just want to quickly point out, I will get to this in a moment, is, again, this sense of partnership here. We have Matt Callery. I don't even see Matt. I think he's already left. He's just turned his camera on and went out to go get a beer or something. Matt, are you actually here? He is here. There is Matt addressing Gettysburg. Many of you might know his program. I've so enjoyed being on it. And here is, again, a way that these three different entities addressing Gettysburg, Gettysburg National Park, and Gettysburg College, right, a way to come together to facilitate conversations with general audiences who we are all so grateful for. I mean, listen, I don't want to denigrate any other field, but I do feel for my peers who teach, I don't know, people like medieval history. I like it maybe a little bit, but they're not going to get this many folks out to hear one of their talks, are they? But we are lucky that we have this built-in audience, right? And it's an audience in which we can have a conversation with, and I hope that we'll be able to do that. I know many of you have a Ravens game that you want to go see. This will give you a sense of my level of interest in NFL football this year. It's not great. Yesterday I was watching a game and I said, honey, Beth's my wife, I said, you gotta get in here and see the end of this game. It's the Packers and Niners. It's for going to the Super Bowl. I texted one of my friends when the Packers quarterback threw an interception. He wrote me back, he said, Pete, you know that game happened last week. I said, what? So, yeah, I'm a Colts fan. I know we got some Maryland people here. Our Colts, of course, are out of it, but yeah, that's rough. I'm going to continue on this sort of personal vein here. I swear I'll get to the topic in just a moment. It's this photograph. It's a photograph that captured my imagination as a young person. I swear I can't handle this. There's a black hole in this audience, right in the middle. No, you all looking at each other. It's you all. I can't see your faces, and it's driving me nuts. All right? So I'm keep straining my eyes. I like to make connection with my audience here. So I'm so sorry, but I'm going to keep. Eventually, I'm going to walk up there. Matt, can you get the camera there? Is it too dark?
No, I can get it.
You can do it all, can't you, Matt? All right, we'll do just that. I'm from Indiana, and when I was a boy, 1970s, right? Came here as a kid, and I was obsessed with this picture because when I was a kid, this picture was identified as what class? Who are this a picture of who?
The 24th Michigan.
Yeah, or the Iron Brigade in general. I sort of overlooked it was just the 24th Michigan. I imagine it as the Iron Brigade, right? And as we all know, 19th Indiana was in the Iron Brigade, and I would just stare at that and think, man, this is probably somebody maybe from Indianapolis, where I grew up. And then, what happened? William Frazanito ruined it for me, did he not? I'm sorry, I forgot my little thing here. Oh, here it is. All right. My students are looking at me with smirks. They have seen me with technology over the years. It's not pretty, is it? Hey, here we go. Let the force be with me. There we go. I picked up this book on my first trip as a kid down to Florida. My parents took me to Disney World and then to the beach. And what do you think the highlight was? The highlight was picking up this book at a mall somewhere in Florida. I told my parents after this trip, I said, never again. If we're going to go on a trip together, we've got to see history. As you can only imagine, I was immensely popular with the neighborhood kids, man. Let's go to Pete's house. He just wants to talk history all the time. Man, I still have my copy. It is beat to hell. And I have a picture of me and Bill Frazanito over at the Reliance Mine Saloon, right? Mary Hills, yeah, man, I treasure that photograph. Well, as we know, that photograph was not of the 24th Michigan or Iron Brigade, that it was of Sims's Georgians, maybe a few Kershaw, South Carolinians thrown in there as well. But that photo, I'm going to go back to it real quickly as you see those men lined up. And again, yes, it is the 24th Michigan. And it is, yes, a picture of those men who fell. They lost some 363 men on July 1st, more than probably any other regiment in the Army of the Potomac. They also had the highest number of killed at 67, and that figure hits 99 when you count the mortally wounded. I think we all can agree that we're fascinated by casualty figures at Gettysburg. But that fascination can lead us on a fool's errand. A fool's errand in which we think that we can somehow measure the violence on the battlefield. I can't tell you, and let me just real quickly. Matt, how's the sound? Am I speaking too loudly in the mics? Can everyone hear me back there? Is the articulation clear and good? Are we all good? All right, excellent. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, often by people who've been to Gettysburg maybe 1 or 2 times. They say to me, show me. Where's the bloodiest spot on the battlefield? Right? Now listen, and that question I guess could be slightly off-putting. It shouldn't be. It's an understandable, I think, sort of, I don't know, fascination with the macabre, right? That's what they want to try to find. But it's a question that defies measurement. It reminds me of, this is a very rough parallel, I taught at West Virginia University for 3 years and enjoyed it immensely. My very first year there, Playboy magazine came out and ranked WVU as
Best party school.
the #1 party school in the country, right? And I thought to myself, how in God's name do they reach that conclusion? Is it, what percentage of students throw up on a Saturday night after they've been to the bars, right? It's just utterly absurd. And you can only imagine the administrators at WVU, they sent us out in force to talk to the media to remind everyone how serious the students at WVU are about their studies. And of course, when the media got our little clips, and they have our voices, right, and they're interviewing us, what images do you think they were flashing on the screen at the same time? But burning couches, right? Burning couches as well. So yeah, and the admissions at WVU, I bet they were doing somersaults, right? They were so happy that this is something that would increase enrollment as well. So this idea of measurement here, it's a very challenging thing, whether it's WVU as a party school or what it means on a battlefield. So I've even caught myself with friends. You walk from monument to monument and you glide over those casualty figures, right? You yell out, oh, this regiment lost this many and had this many wounded and had this many missing in action. And when we do that, when we start counting the dead, it's easy to forget that every body matters. We lose touch with the individual soldier. And it is a story of that individual soldier that we can only recover if we look at that man's experience in relationship to his personal and private relationships with his family members, and in particular with his wives and sweethearts. That's crucial. And that's where we're going to go, and that's what we're going to do today. So here are the 2 questions. Here's the book again. These are sort of the 2 overarching questions that I'm giving consideration today. It's something maybe that we can return to, and I'd be more than interested in hearing your thoughts and reflections upon this. And I'm particularly interested in that last question about the private and personal lives, digging deep into that interior world. Can we do it as historians? And if we try, what value can we get from that kind of investigation? People that we're going to study today, John Pardington and Sara Pardington. John Pardington's letters to his wife, Sara. The originals are right here, right below us, in fact, at the Gettysburg Museum. John Pardington was a member of the 24th Michigan. John Pardington was born in England, but he spent his formative years in Michigan. Just before the war, he lived outside of Detroit. It is there where he married his wife in 1860. And June of 1862, she gave birth to their first child, Maria, baby Maria. When the child was born in 1860, just a week old, John Pardington wrote to a friend and said, Maria is a week old and as smart as a cricket. I don't know how he could determine that at a week old. What John Pardington forgot or did not anticipate or envision is this, that baby Maria is going to become what? an adolescent first, right? A teenage girl. I have two of them at home. I'm blessed to have two wonderful twins, but they have become unrecognizable to me at times as teenage girls, and they know how to hurt you, right? I'm going to give you just a quick example. I'm not going to name either one of them yet. One of my girls said this to me. After looking at a talk that I was about to give on semi-literate and illiterate Confederate soldiers, and they spoke their letters, right? And so I said to my daughter, well, this is what the talk is about. And these soldiers, when they spoke their letters, they didn't care about grammar. They didn't care about punctuation. They didn't care about spelling. And what did she say to me? God, they were so lucky. It hurts. That hurts. You're going to see in the quotes from John here in just a moment, because I will be quoting his letters. I kept the spelling as it is in the book. Dear Sara, as I should imagine, is the title of the book, published by University of Indiana Press. So if you'd like to see John's letters to Sara, you can get on Amazon, or you can maybe even pick it up right here at the bookstore. So John enlisted in the summer of 1862, as I mentioned. He enlisted after Abraham Lincoln's call for 300,000 volunteers for 3 years. When John joined, he did get a little bit of a financial inducement from the state of Michigan, as well as from his home county, Wayne County. That inducement that he received was actually support for his family, or for Sara, added up to $15 a month, in addition to what he was receiving from Uncle Sam. There is one historian who has characterized John Pardington as one of Lincoln's mercenaries. I'm not going to mention the book. I actually think it's a pretty good book, but I just want you all to reflect upon this very point. Certainly, John got some financial support and some inducement that other soldiers in 1861 did not receive. But in taking that money, in fact, does that in any way diminish, as I think you will find, that John Pardington was a deeply idealistic man and had fervent beliefs in the cause of union. So, joins again, summer of 1862, boards a train, and on August 29th, that train from Michigan rolled into, a student over right here from Pittsburgh, it rolled into Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And when it rolled into Pittsburgh, the young women of that city stormed the train on both sides. They were so excited, I guess, to see real men from the Midwest, show up in the Iron City. And they had a bunch of little handkerchiefs, right? And you were to take a handkerchief if you were a soldier as a way of remembering that young woman. John Pardington took 6 handkerchiefs. 6! He wrote Sara back. I mean, listen, Beth's not here, but sometimes in a marriage, you shouldn't always be really truthful, should you? So he told her about this and said, I did take them. He says, but I thought they'd be useful to me. And then he says, please forgive me. So from there, he landed in Washington, D.C. He immediately fell ill. He was put into a hospital. He wrote Sara from the hospital that the doctors gave me a dose of stuff, which I thought would kill me. I don't believe they know what they're giving me. Give me the chance of bullets than the hospitals. Obviously, John Pardington had not seen combat yet. He did discover, though, that the drilling ground for the 24th Michigan was a dangerous place. They would often almost engage in mock battles. They would fire blank rounds, but for whatever reason, people would get careless. A few of his comrades forgot to take out their ramrods. So a few men got hit. He uses the word balls. I don't know if he means rocks or actual bullets, but a few guys, for whatever reason, thought it'd be a good idea to put rocks or bullets into their muskets. He said that a few people got hit. One guy had his eyes almost shot out. He said another person had his fingers shot into half. And then he concluded, but it's all fun. Taking each other prisoner. Again, it's all sort of inexplicable to me. But nonetheless, he is learning the school of the soldier here outside of Washington. But it's also a time in which he has an opportunity to reflect upon his marriage. And I'm not going to preface this first letter. I will read it out loud to you, and I'll go slow. If I was at home, I think I should stay there, for I know now how to appreciate the company. And if I ever come home, the Lord willing, I think that I shall not give you any cause again to set up for me nights like you used to, Sara. If I could recall those nights, I would sacrifice my right hand. But you will forgive me, won't you, dear? I made a faithful promise before God. If I ever get back to you, I will live a different life. Sara, I'm trying to live a different one here, and I hope the Lord helping me, I shall return a Christian. Here again is my point about the importance of delving into the private or personal lives of these men. Here, what we see, and we see it amongst Union and Confederate soldiers at the time of enlistment, is a belief that joining the ranks is a moment to remake themselves as men. And John did just that. Now, we know a lot of men faltered and went the opposite way, but for John, he gave up the bottle, stopped cussing, and he started reading the Bible. He found not just his warrior voice in the ranks, but he found that place, that moment in which he could build character. That is the preoccupation among men on both sides in the 19th century. They want to be seen as men of character. It's what gets them basically out of bed, to live a life of virtue, to live a life of discipline, to be a man recognized for your intelligence. And then once in the Army, of course, it's to show yourself as what? As a soldier of bravery. Absolutely. It is all of those things. Now listen, here's something for you all just to think about. We know that war tested men in innumerable ways, particularly their value system. And as they are wrestling to try to get through the day, the grind of survival, we know that some men concluded that the Army life was not the life in which one could be elevated, right? That you could be that man of character, while others stayed true to that belief, continued to press themselves, to remake themselves, to be different. And they found that inspiration in the cause itself. So that politics, belief in union for John Pardington, good, inseparable from the private and personal side. I got to be a better husband. I got to be a better father. And I can only do that by becoming a better Christian. That'd be good. I'll just look at that letter again. Man, that's a painful letter, huh? What was going on when he came back? Was he just drunk and surly? Right? Or did he get physical? It had to be pretty awful that he wanted to erase that, right, from their marriage, right? That was shadow, right, was following him, stalking him, right, while he was in the Army. And never ever forget that great physical separation, that distance transcended by letters from time to time, but we know that for these men and for the women that they were writing to, that mail was often irregular. And during these great gaps, you can only imagine the worry and the anxiety that both sides felt. It's so easy, of course, for us to lose any sense of that because of the instantaneous ways in which we're able to communicate with each other. I should say this, so I will say this. If you ever have a question or a comment, just raise your hand. I can handle it, right, as we're going here. Something hits you, I'm serious, just raise your hand. Just can't have any comments, really, any long ones. Questions, just yell them out. I think one of the things that struck me when I wrote this book, how do you like that for some self-promotion, huh? Jesus, that's sad, huh? I was struck by how men on both sides were emotionally open in their letters, and that was crucial for their remaking themselves as men. They had to be open about their fears and their worries and their aspirations. They had to confide to the women in their lives. Too often, of course, we see these men here at Gettysburg between July 1st and July 3rd. We lose all sense of them as who they were, as people, all the things they were contending with. And for these soldiers, the openness in which they wrote about what was happening in their lives, particularly their fear of battle, shocked me, surprised me, right? I always believed that the Civil War soldier had this facade, iron facade, that they sort of stood behind, and you could not crack it. There's this just ridiculous notion that I think is finally gone, is that we really can't get to the real war, that there's a dark war out there, and the soldiers were hiding it from us. There is no doubt that the soldiers were very much aware of who was going to read that letter. And they often did shape the content of that letter depending upon who was reading it. So yes, are there letters in which war is romanticized? Without a doubt. But the overwhelming, the preponderance of correspondence is just the opposite, man. They pull back curtains. In fact, they get frustrated that the people at home can't get the real sense of what they're enduring, because why? As they say, all we got's words, and words aren't enough, right? Not enough to be able to convey what they're enduring. I have this sense that time is slipping away from me right now. I know we only have so much. I'm going to check here, so I apologize. I'm going to take a break and see where we are. How are we doing here? All right, we're good. No, we're fine. Here's a perfect example of Pardington's emotional openness. You see, I can put your picture in my watch pocket and have it with me all the time. It's my only comfort now. When I gaze on it and kiss it, I can hardly stop the tears that would crowd into my eyes. Oh, Sara, no one knows the sacrifices a man makes when he leaves wife and child. If I had known it, I think I should hardly have left. But keep this to yourself. For I would not discourage anyone for enlisting, for I think it is every man's duty. But if I was single, it would be different. I think a single man ought not to stop a minute to think, but should start right off to shoulder his gun. Brave fellows are enduring all the hardships man can stand. And those who stay at home and quietly look on, shame on them for cowards. Don't you say so, Sara? I verily believe the young girls would turn out en masse and help crush this terrible rebellion. I know you would, for one, Sara. In October, he left Washington. Pardington did. In Washington, before he left, he visited another hospital. He saw many of the injured from 2nd Manassas, and I believe also from Antietam. He saw many of those men who were amputated, had arms or limbs amputated. He wrote to Sara, and this is his word, not mine. He said he could only imagine a future after the war in which we would be surrounded by cripples, right? So he's got sort of his first sort of glimpse of what the battlefield could do to men. He gets to the camp of the Iron Brigade. As you know, the 24th Michigan did not enter the Iron Brigade until after Antietam. They are close, the 24th Michigan, close to the battlefield, close to Sharpsburg. Every day he wandered to the hospital where there were some Confederate prisoners, and it was a grisly sight. He said that their clothes were in tatters, they were filthy, they were covered with lice. He had numerous conversations with them. He unfortunately never ever recounted those conversations, but he concluded this. He said, here's his words, not mine, if the big men could just see this, they'd want to bring this war to a conclusion. Now here's again where these soldiers have conflicting thoughts. He's disgusted by war. He wished, of course, some way, somehow would be somehow brought to an end. He has great compassion for his enemy, but then he concluded on an October 12th letter, after visiting one of these Confederate hospitals, He wrote, "Dear Sara, I must now close, for I must clean my gun and keep it in good fighting trim so I can pop a rebel every time." 24th Michigan got his baptism to fire at Fredericksburg. Thankfully for Pardington and his comrades, it was not the frontal assaults against Marie's Heights. Instead, they attacked the Confederate right flank, held by Stonewall Jackson's men. During that attack, Pardington had 2 close calls. A shell exploded directly in front of him and covered him with dirt. Another shell shortly thereafter exploded behind him and took down a few men. The letter that he wrote to Sara, and as you can tell, his punctuation and spelling is somewhat erratic, but that letter after Fredericksburg, the prose extremely jagged. And here again, "I had 2 very narrow escapes, but thank God he protected me so far. It was a most bloody battle. I called a regular butchery to take men there where they could not get no chance. It is a wonder they did not cut our army all to pieces." And then he concluded, "But the 24th has got its name up, I tell you. The way it stood under such terrible fire of shot," it should be shot, well, that's his spelling again, "of shot and shell." All right, I can't help myself. Help me here. Let's interpret this. It's right there in front of you. What does this reveal to us about how he is making sense of, or trying to make sense of, combat? What stands out? And you can just yell if you want to write. Go ahead, Al. Do you want to say something?
Calls it regular butchery.
What's that? He calls it a regular butchery. He does, right? So he calls it a regular butchery. Now, how is that in conflict or in tension with anything else that he's written here?
The last lines, that the 24th is ready to fight and they're ready to go.
Good. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, repeat what you said so everyone can hear it. So our first comment is what stands out. He called this attack a regular butchery. But then at the very end, he wrote, but wait a minute, we stood this test, right? And we now have our reputation as men, as dependable soldiers. There is the tension right there. And it should remind us of how Civil War soldiers were, 1, conflicted about combat, and 2, I get somewhat weary when I hear that the soldier experience is a universal one. They wrote about the same things: hungry, sleepy, miss home. Okay, fine. There are universal elements without question. But my friends, look at that letter. How many soldiers today they were writing from Afghanistan, would have said, our company was mauled. We lost 75% of our men. Hey, but we've got our reputation. Of course you wouldn't say that. But you see then how Civil War Americans had a very different understanding of killing and death, particularly killing. And so to stand up and to face that onslaught from the Confederates, and even though he believed it was a butchery, which would suggest that Pardington thought that bad generalship was at work, but what still, at least in Pardington's mind, cast that to the side. The men stood up like men and showed themselves to be brave, even though our generals squandered our lives, right? I'm always struck by this with Pickett's charge. Someone had told me once that George Pickett, right, and that ridiculous quote that I don't think he ever said after the war, that man ruined my division. That man got your face on the front page of the Southern Illustrated News after Gettysburg, right? That man gave you immortality. I mean, I suspect that George Pickett certainly was more than just a little bothered that his command was wrecked. But what George Pickett and every survivor knew of Pickett's charge, that they had earned immortality, that their bravery and manhood would not be questioned. The casualties and the numbers attested to that, right? All right. Keep moving here.
Question.
Sure, please.
A comment, actually.
Sure, please. Yep.
That in comparison with that last line and the previous letters to Sara, he's also telling Sara, that I am a man.
Absolutely.
And I think
Absolutely.
that was an important message that he wanted to convey there.
Absolutely. I am a man. The other thing we should talk about, just think about, is the very top line. Why am I living and others are not? He certainly ascribes it to providence, but that doesn't explain it with the kind of clarity and consistency that men were searching for. We know following Fredericksburg, things got awful for the Army of the Potomac. The famous Mud March that occurred at the end of January, so December 1862, that's Fredericksburg, then followed January of 1863, this failed attempt to outflank R.E. Lee's army. Morale damn near collapsed in the Army of the Potomac afterwards. Desertion skyrocketed. But for John Pardington, the blood sacrifice on December the 13th that had reinforced his commitment and loyalty to the cause, while there were many of his comrades throughout the Army of the Potomac who just had enough of the bungling and of the butchery, Pardington did not. In fact, he was approving of stern measures to keep men in the ranks. So this is a soldier from his company, a man that had deserted. He said that if this man showed up, to Sara of course, showed up in their hometown, that everyone should single this soldier out for what he had done. And then here's the part, and that, I'm sorry I don't know names, but that gentleman's observation, we can reinforce it with this. Sara, before I would undergo the same as they did, I would sooner be brought home in my coffin to you as bad as I went to see you, dear. I never could desert Sara. I could never bring such disgrace on you and my little darling. Also that spring, I'm going to say this very, hopefully efficiently, John Pardington supported what was an initiative amongst junior officers in the Army of the Potomac. These junior officers were Republican in their political persuasion. They started a campaign of petitions that endorsed the Republican/Abraham Lincoln way of war, which of course included emancipation. It also included a hard war against civilians. These petitions that were, again, organized by junior officers, which Pardington believed in, they were then published in northern newspapers, right? And also in these petitions, threats that they would come back to their communities and put down wartime dissenters. And we know they were called, class? Copperheads, absolutely, right? And in fact, John was, somewhat dismayed that so many so-called loyal people were allowing this to continue. Now, I want you again to think about this. The book that covers this topic, it's a great book by Zach Fry. Back in the day, people used to take notes and write things down, and now everyone just sort of stares at me. I think we probably have that book in the bookstore. Look at this, a good student, and of course he's in the front row. They're always sucking up in the front row, aren't they, huh? Zach Fry, help me out here. Chris Gwanners, anybody, it's embarrassing. I should know what the title is.
Republic in the ranks.
Say it one more time.
A republic in the ranks.
Look at that, Matt Calorie. This is the same guy you go on his show, and he just wants the sympathy of the audience all the time. And he says, I'm not a historian. I don't know anything. I just get so tiresome. Thank you, Matt. Republican. It's a great book, y'all. It's a really good book. Someone have a comment? I thought I saw a hand somewhere. No, we're good? Okay. So you need to also think about this. I'm sorry I didn't finish my point. These Union soldiers threatened violence. They said, if we're going to come back, you're going to see the point of the bayonets. We can't wait to level our rifles, and we will break up these demonstrations against the war. I want you again to give deep consideration to this point. This is a war for democracy, a war for liberty. Yes, we're all in agreement about this, but these same Union soldiers were willing, eager to do what?
Kill their own.
Absolutely, to use brute force against dissent. Right? Something to ponder and think about. Chris, how are we doing on time?
You got all the time you need.
All right, love to hear that. We don't want to miss the Ravens game.
That means 20 minutes.
20 minutes, I like that. We'll get you there. We'll get you there. You know. Again, this connection that John had with Sara was so important during this very dark time of the war after Fredericksburg. He is turning to her, again, as confessor. That's what she is. And I'm going to read one more quote to you here. Well, I'm going to go back to this before you read this. They exchanged photographs. They exchanged locks of hair. These things matter so much. I wish we had an hour so we could talk about the stuff of war. There was a belief, if you got a photograph from your beloved, that you could stare into the eyes of that individual, right, in that photo. You could look into their eyes and you could connect with their soul. So that stuff is valuable, it's important. And it is that relationship, that marriage that John has with his wife that is, again, it's kind of his life preserver. And then he goes off and sends a letter about a recent photograph that she had taken with baby Maria and sent it to him. I've just received your affectionate, of course, letter, which contained your two precious likenesses, which I tell you, Sara, made me feel lonesome when I gazed at your lovely face and babies. I think it's a splendid picture of yourself. Dear, you're getting fat. Come on. Women generally do when their husband leaves them for a spell. That's the best part. No insult, dear. That's from Kim, right? Right. I mean, he might as well just send her a thigh master in the mail, right? Just sit that off. Hard to recover from that. I mean, I think all the academics, historians, and we're all historians here, and we are certainly some of the most awkward men I've ever seen around women. But that pretty much takes the case there, right? All right. Real struggle at home, and a serious one, was that Sara was having a difficult time finding a place to live. She just didn't have enough money. She was going from relative to relative. There certainly were some personal difficulties with these relatives. They just weren't getting along. The situation was so dire that Sara decided that she'd have to get a job. If she could get some money, then she could find a place for her and baby Maria to live. She informed John of that fact, and in fact, John was enraged by the prospect of his wife going outside of the home. He wrote back to her, "Do you suppose, dear Sara, I would stay here and to know that you were slaving yourself for other folks? Never. So never say it again. Do you suppose, dear Sara, that I could stay here to know..." Well, I just repeated that. Sorry, I wrote that twice. There you have it. The point of this is, I'm not sure how I screwed up this quote. I sent this PowerPoint to Matt, so he must have, it has to be Matt's fault here. No, it's my fault. I'm not sure what I did there. But the point again is that what someone else said, that his need to prove himself as a brave man, not just to her, but to the public at large, and the idea that he could not care for his wife was something that he simply could not stomach. I want to make a final point about this. We think again about the financial duress that was often placed on Southern women when their Confederate husbands went off to war, and that's without a doubt. That's the case, especially for poor women. That's the same thing on the northern side as well for Sara. So they were able to somehow find a compromise. Obviously, he never deserted, and she never got a job outside of the house, but they did think about this. They thought about buying their own place, their own cottage. There's some very sweet letters about that, back and forth. But John said that he was worried. He was worried that they would make this investment and that he would either get injured or that he would get killed and that they would lose the house and lose everything. But he wrote, "I like the house, Sara. It would make us a nice little home, wouldn't it? We could have lots of love in that cottage." And now we approach the summer campaigns of 1863. As you know, Battle of Chancellorsville, where John sees very limited fighting. But he's able to get a couple of letters off during the Gettysburg campaign from that march and from Fredericksburg up into Maryland and then Pennsylvania. He wrote this. He said he couldn't get a furlough. And explaining why he couldn't get a furlough right at the cusp of the Gettysburg campaign, although, dear Sara, I want to see you very much. My adopted country needs me more not as I love you less than the good old flag, but I love that next to you, and will stick by it as long as she waves. For it is the only flag of the free, and will triumph above all other rags that are afloat against us, now and meaning probably forever. He then concluded that their letter by saying, well, God bless you both are the prayers of your John. On July 1st, 24th Michigan, with the rest of the Iron Brigade, on the military crest overlooking Willoughby Run, waiting for that afternoon assault, Pettigrew's brigade, probably not far from John, was the flag of the 24th Michigan, the flag that reminded him of his home, his family, his friends. Also in his breast pocket of his shirt, he had a picture of Sara and of baby Maria. Sara, I put a little pocket in the blue flannel shirt right by my heart, and there you and baby lays night and day. That is the locket, the one you sent me last. I keep it in the Bible, and I carry that in my breast pocket. So you see, dear, I have you by me all the time and through every danger, but I will try not to get you hurt. During the assault against the 24th Michigan, as you know, the regiment had to retire when the 19th Indiana gave way, retired into the heart of McPherson's Woods. One of his comrades, a man named Edward Raymer, described in his diary an entry written on July the 3rd, the following. Gettysburg terrible. Advanced double quick on the 1st. Did not have time to load guns. Fighting in the woods lasted over 1 hour. Standing 20 paces from the Rebs, we fired continuous volleys. Lost Price and Klein. Lost my way in the confusion when I heard Carroll cry out, heard he is dead now. I killed 14 Rebs, shot the one who killed John Pardington. Lieutenant Buell rebuked me for drinking after, said I would not be promoted. I do not care. Back in Detroit, we can only imagine Sara learned of the great Battle of Gettysburg. Imagine that Sara was expecting letters from John, and we can imagine that Sara was canvassing the newspapers, looking, right, to see if her husband was missing in action. She asked a close friend named Willie Sanders to inquire about John, and Sanders then sent a letter August 19th to a chaplain, a man named William Way. And this is William's response, or Way's response. In my report of the killed and wounded, I did not mention the name of your friend Pardington because I could not ascertain anything definite concerning him. And now I am just as much in doubt and cannot give you any information positive. I hope you have heard from him in this. Those I buried on the field were so changed that I should not have known his body had it been there. He may be a prisoner. I hope so, for the sake of his family, and may God bless them. Reverend John Way. And then William Sanders wrote back to Sara. William Way does not seem to know much about poor John, but I guess the news is true, meaning, of course, that he had passed. The point of this story is that we can find in the example of Sara, we can extrapolate from that, right? The sorrow, the mourning, suffering, the pain, the thousands of families faced, north and south, after the Battle of Gettysburg. This map, many of you know, it's the Elliott map done in 1864. It is a map, as you can see, that marks many of the graves, the burial pits, the trenches on the battlefield. But like the photographs, These little lines obscure as much as they reveal. Who resided underneath these lines? Farmer who had his head crushed by a shell, leaving behind a wife and child? A blacksmith who screamed out in agony from a bullet to the gut, his comrades holding on to him during his last moments of life? Or a carpenter shot in the bowels, left on the field, delirious with pain, hallucinating that he was back home in his mother's arms? School teacher shot in the heart, living just long enough to ask his brother for some water. And somewhere in these woods, on the afternoon of July 1st, there was a clerk from Detroit, Michigan, who lay dying. John Pardington's final moments of life, we can only speculate about what was going through his mind. Maybe he was thinking about his daughter, baby Maria. Never see her again. And she would only get to know him through his letters. Or maybe he was beseeching God to let him live so that he might go home, so that he could prove to Sara that he was worthy of her love, that he was a changed man, that he could be a devoted husband and a devoted father, that there'd be no more late nights of drinking, no more cussing. But in those fuzzy, final moments of life, maybe he saw that cabin, that little cottage that he and Sara dreamed of, that home that would be their own, that home where he could unite with his family without war. They could live out their lives there, knowing what? That they had made great sacrifices in their marriage to save the Union. Thank you.
So Sara remarried in 1864, and she had a few more children with her second husband. She passed, but baby Maria is one that sort of had a distinguished career after the war, became a progressive reformer, lived outside the University of Michigan, and named, I think, one of her kids after Abraham Lincoln. Well, the one that I always tout is Private Voices, University of North Carolina, Gilder Lehrman. There's so much out there, and it's just incredible stuff.
Cool.